Hello, I'm Choghakate Kazarian. I'm the guest curator of the exhibition Mood of the Moment, Gabi Agion and the House of Chloé.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm so happy to be here with you all. I'm Kristina Parsons. I'm an assistant curator here at the Jewish Museum, and I'm going to send it over to you, Dal.
Hello, I am Dal Chodha in London, and I am the editor-in-chief of Archivist Addendum. And Géraldine?
Hello. Hello. I'm Géraldine Sommier. I created the heritage department at Chloé in 2011. And I'm very pleased to talk with you today.
It's a very special gathering here. We're so glad you could join us, Géraldine, to add a bit of a coda to the conversation that we had the other week in person at the museum with Dal and Choghakate. This is the advantage to Zoom, so we're going to use every moment of it. I was really struck in the conversation, Dal and Choghakate, that you had about what makes an archive and what group of material or types of objects then come together in such a way that we have what can become a collection and an archive. And Géraldine, I wondered if you could get us started just in giving us a bit of the history and your involvement in how the Chloé Archive came together, how that started, what materials are part of it, and a bit of context of what that material is.
Yeah, sure. The Chloé Archive, it's a collection of objects, of course. And the objects are mainly garments, but it's also sketches and photographs. And also a lot of research. One of the first things I made also when I arrived at the Chloé Archive, because I was told that I was starting from scratch, is to go through all the press. Fashion editorials are always what we refer to when we start a project in museum. Previously, my arrival at Chloé, I was working at Les Arts Décoratifs Fashion Museum in Paris. And each time we start a project, we start by looking through all the press, because fashion magazines are really what is tangible to get dates and evolution on a subject. So for instance, when we work on an exhibition about bags, we go through all bags since fashion magazines exist, so end of the 18th century. And the same each time when you work in a museum, you're starting a project, and that's what I've done when I start at Chloé. I start going at the library and going through all Paris Vogue, looking for all the credit, all the mention of Chloé full time, so we can get an idea of the evolution of the style of the Maison history through years, with accurate dates of the date of the release of the magazines.
It really is such a special part of the archive to have all of that comprehensive information, to be able to look at the garments themselves and those be such a beautiful time capsule of what the brand was exploring for a given season, but then also to get a sense of then how that design was received by the public, how magazines like Vogue characterized it, how it was spread and received for those of us who get to enjoy it. Having all of that research together is really quite unique, I think. Was it something that you think that really came together because of your experience working in museums, that this is something you hoped would become a resource for future researchers? What was the kind of impetus of bringing all of those things together?
In fact, when I arrived, I was told that nothing has been kept. I think we have to start by something that is also very accessible thanks to public library, in fact. So start by the beginning and recreate the story. And also, in fact, as often, the archive department in Fashion House are created when there is an anniversary in view. And in the case of Chloé, the idea was to create an exhibition for and a big book, because there was no historical book at this time, for the Chloé anniversary 60 years in 2012, as Chloé has been founded in 1952. And so I thought, and going through the page of Paris Vogue, I discovered how Chloé had been gifted through all its history, being very supported by press and Francine Crescent. And so we had editorials by all the main fashion photographers, such as Helmut Newton, Deborah Tarberville, Guy Bourdin, etc., etc., Norman Parkinson, David Bailey, etc. And I thought, oh, that was the first month, the 2 first months after my arrival. I thought that's so great. We can start by a photograph exhibition, at least. If we don't have enough garments, we have secure and a beautiful books also that this research was transformed after in a beautiful book, Chloé Attitude, that was the first book with all the editorials giving an idea of the evolution of the story of the Maison since its beginning.
And then I guess it was just 5 years later that, Dal, you worked on the issue of Archivist that was so closely in collaboration with Géraldine and looking at the archive then.
And in fact, also just because just to finish to reply to your question, in fact, I've been told that nothing has been kept buried, but little by little, knowing better people internally, I've been told that in a storeroom there was boxes that they didn't know really what they were containing, and in fact there was like something like 500 garments that have been kept by people of goodwill. In very bad conditions, so all compressed, stuck together, but people having think, oh, this dress is quite special and we should not give it to the intern, and kept them. So it was not good in preventive conservation, but it was better than nothing. And so that was also the beginning of the garments collection. And also in these storerooms, there was also thousands of sketches, and voila, how it begins. The collection begins.
So 500 garments found in a few boxes were the kind of serendipitous start of what has become such a beautiful collection of garments and sketches and accessories and photos to chart the brand's history. Amazing. So Dal, I wonder if I can jump it over to you, because I know you and Géraldine haven't had a chance to talk about your collaboration in putting together the issue of Archivist and what your experience was like working on that.
Well, I think what's so wonderful listening to Géraldine speak is that it reasserts the importance of fashion magazines, which is something we're constantly kind of questioning and debating. And it's so touching to actually hear somebody their work is embedded in understanding the history of fashion and clothing and culture at large. And I think so often I'm facing conversations that are very much about sort of questioning, do we need print magazines? Do we need to kind of kill trees? These are things that I've said myself to various students and to various peers of mine. And really kind of, I'm really kind of moved by that sense that pile of magazines that we all have at home, that at some point when your life changes, you look at and you think, I'm going to bin these, or I can't move these, or I can't afford to keep these, or I don't have space for this, that they have such value. I think we've been sort of, in the last decade or so, maybe forced down a path of thinking that magazines and printed matter is ephemeral, in the sense that it should be consumed and binned, and it really just comments on the time that it's in. And we don't really think an awful lot or enough about how does it last, and more importantly, what does it tell us in years and years and decades to come. And I think what was staggering about coming to New York 2 weeks ago to see you all and to, go through the show with you both and to talk with Choghakate and see those garments again. Géraldine, it was really spooky for me because looking at the garments in the magazine and the publication that we did together and the way that we treated the garments and the way that they were sort of re-embodied and brought back to life in a way that I know you were nervous about at certain points. And now looking at the things sort of perfectly pristine and beautifully cared for on hangers, it was weird, to be honest. I found it really strange, Kristina, in a good way, though. I think those moments are really healthy for us to remember that so much of what drives me in my own work is that love of life, and not necessarily the object. It's actually what the object is engaged in and what it's doing. And, you know, one of those tensions that Jane, Howard, and I with archivists have always had with archives is that, you know, quite often once they are part of Géraldine's care or even your care at the museum, they become something different. And fashion, I think, always struggles with that. You know, even furniture design, if you like, a chair that one can't sit on, what is it then? Is it a chair or has it become a sculpture? And I think these are really important questions that all fashion curators need to kind of ask themselves because in some ways presenting them without a body in is presenting them as something else. But Choghakate, I would love to know what you think of that too, right? You're sort of de-embodying them. And in some ways, going through the show really kind of reignited my love, not only for printed matter, but also I hadn't looked at that issue of Archivist that we'd done in 2017 really, since sort of 2 weeks ago when we were looking at it with all the wonderful people that came to the talk. And there was something really nice for me in this idea about making something, leaving it for a while, and looking back after it's been cooking. And Choghakate, I wondered for you as well, how it felt seeing the clothes that you had treated very differently to us, how that felt for you.
I think that was why I really wanted you to come and talk about it because, you know, I did this photo shoot at the Chloé headquarters for the book in an entirely different way as you did it for archivists, but we worked with the same archive and same photographer, which was entirely by chance, but I think it was interesting to, in a few years, how the status of this archive has changed. And it's sort of natural process of, I don't know if we can say that in English, but archivization or sort of becoming an archive. And also I wanted to kind of emphasize that and to be more self-conscious and acknowledge that these garments have changed. And it was even more important for this specific archive because, well, Chloé is kind of, I think for some brands like Margiela or Chalayan, they were museum objects to begin with, like already on the runway. They were never really meant to be worn every day. So it was more obvious to present these objects in a museum. But for Chloé, that has been a very easy, ready to wear brand that has never had the pretension to be an art object and that has been so little shown in museum. It was not that obvious. So for me, it was very important to show that this is an archival collection and to acknowledge that and kind of to play with it in the way. That's why I decided to present them in what I call a storage state on the hangers and disembody them to just really play with the fact that no, the body's not there anymore. So just we should stop just trying to recreate it, but just, you know, be more self-conscious and acknowledge their status about it. And it's an archive that has already some life. It's more than a decade that Géraldine has founded the archive. You were there, I think, more in the beginning, more in the experimental period. I think I arrived in the more heritage moment of the archive. So
I remember, Choghakate, you said that seeing the garments, how they're preserved and cared for in the archives was so instrumental to how you were thinking of the display for the exhibition too.
That was my inspiration. Is when I went with Géraldine to their storage and just looking at her pulling the garments on a hanger. And, you know, she was standing up on a ladder and I was just on the floor and just seeing these hangers, like just how the dresses were just hanging, floating. It was very beautiful. And also it thought to me, I mean, it appeared to me much more natural than trying to artificially recreate the body in a museum.
Yes, and also we raise is also the question of how assume the depth of the object in the collection, because also, when we have this shooting with archivists, and I have to say to my friends from museum that I am not a total betrayal. Of course, the first thing I've done is to go and purchase a skin color leotard in a dance shop. That's because I was so stressed that thinking, oh my God, they are going to sweat in the garments. And it's, of course, something that is completely forbidden in a museum, but we have some more freedom in a way working in a company. And also, even if we try always to have the consciousness of preserving a collection, and that we managed to apply. And in fact, it was the only time that I changed the rules. And in fact, and the question, it's how, in fact, how you manage to have a fashion exhibition or a fashion representation of a collection more alive than in on the mannequin. And I think yeah, it was also very interesting, this question of de-embodying and become more on a two-dimensional approach of the garments in the exhibition, thanks to your also challenging presentation and very innovative at the Jewish Museum with your idea, Choghakate, of not having most of the garments not on mannequins.
Well,
That
thank you
was
to
two
you,
ways of
your work. It was your work to make it happen.
But yeah, no, in the beginning, I think it's really all this question of how you present and how you manage to make alive again your collection is really a challenging question. And I think there is two interesting replies in your the experimentation you made with this collection, both of you. And also, when we had this project in 2017, in fact, thinking and listening to you, I think it's really also interesting to discover, because it never came to my mind, that it was also a turning point in the life of this archive, because in 2017, Chloé was extending its headquarters in a new building, and the idea with this shooting was to create like a phantomatic presence of the garments welcoming the new place for the house. And that was also the moment where we get a proper location in the building with a dedicated space, with a proper conservation tool, compactus, and an external storage in a museum storage place. So it's interesting also that this coincides with, in fact, the first chapter where we were when we were becoming more professional also in the evolution of the archive departments within the house.
But I think that's what's so interesting about this conversation, or just generally in terms of the layers of an archive, and at what point it becomes professional, serious, museum quality. These different kinds of, I guess there's different hierarchies involved in what makes something archival. Also, I think the term is used very loosely now, as we discussed again. You know, a lot of things are just things and stuff that people own or things people have, but actually the difference in the way things are cared for, I think, I love, you know, and often people that work in roles like Géraldine say on the words like preservation and care. And I think these are really important words, because I guess from my point of view as an editor, I'm also interested in what kind of attitude, I guess, is being preserved with that garment. So we're practically preserving a piece of a skirt, a dress, a kind of beautiful silk blouse, but actually quite often what magazines do and what photographs do is they also embed a kind of social political time as well. You know, they kind of lock in an idea, let's say, about women's lives or about culture or about other types of movements that are happening. And that's something that kind of often isn't obvious if you are looking at a beautiful, you know, t-shirt that's preserved in acid-free tissue paper in a drawer. There's all of those other things that you can't necessarily apply. And I think that's what's interesting about museum collections and, you know, exhibitions, that there's so much opportunity actually to kind of, I think what was so wonderful about this show that you've just done is that it's almost like stripping it down back to Gabby, because I think there's so much work to do still for people to understand more about her and where she's from, and, you know, how pioneering it was for her to set up the brand as we know it today. And so in some ways it really made sense to kind of strip away all of that other noisy stuff that perhaps is added or becomes more complicated when you look at the kind of editorials or the way that things are shot. You make these associations, but there's something really pure about the show at the Jewish Museum. And I think that purity is sometimes lacking in other exhibitions that are sort of self-consciously trying to reassert themselves into a period, and sometimes miss the point. And I think that's easier to do in print. And I love the idea that contributing another magazine to Géraldine's Chloé Archive will confuse kind of archivists and researchers in the future when they look at it, because it won't be obvious that it's 2017. It won't be obvious of what season we've shot, because we've made it pretty not difficult, but obscure to try and kind of understand those things, because Vijay Night was very much about an emotion and attitude of Chloé, picking up on Judith Clark's exhibition too that she worked on with you. It is about this feeling, isn't it? And Choghakate, there's been so many different people that have been the you know, in charge of the house, if you like, and there's a new person now, Shemina, whose show I think is next week or in 2 weeks' time. So there's an interesting kind of sense as well of what people do with how they use what Géraldine is taking care of. I think that's also a really interesting kind of thing for us to think about.
I think it's the Chloé Archive, as all these companies' archives, are so interesting because they're kind of in between us consumers of fashion and magazines and museums collection. They have this in-between status that make them so exciting and allows so many different uses. For instance, they could be useful for designers to look into. They could be useful to do this kind of hybrid project, as Dal you did with the archivist, or to organize more traditional museum exhibitions. And also that allows experiments, as Géraldine did, you know, with how do we present these garments that cannot be presented in a traditional museum display system. And I think that you have that kind of flexibility and hybridity to do different ways, and all of them as valid, and shows and activate the garments in a different way.
I think something I've come to really love about the presentation on the hangers that we have in our show at the museum too is that there's not a particular body type or way of wearing things that is prescribed. And I think that is so much my love of fashion, and so many visitors who have come to see the show have really enjoyed the opportunity to continue the fantasy of how they could imagine wearing something. It's the way that we get dressed in the morning. You pull something from your closet, you imagine who you could be wearing that. And that, I think, is the other very special part of the number of ways in which these garments live their various lives in magazines, in print at the time of their making, in publications, style like yours, in the catalog that we made for the exhibition with the photos that you directed, Choghakate, with the way that the garment lives in the archive now, and also the way that designers are continuing to work with the pieces in the archive. Géraldine, I know you've talked about how important of a resource that has become for designers as they come, and I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Yes, but it's the pleasure we have being in a house and managing a collection in a house that it's the objects are less guessed than in a museum storage place, and there are mean also, of course, to establish the place of the maison in fashion history thanks to museum exhibition and publication, but it's also an inspiration for the studio. And so, and that's also borrows a place. It's always also something also quite challenging because we have to educate also the people at the studio not to have the garments worn, right? And to few rules of preventive conservation, but it's also the pleasure and the luck being in a fashion house that your collection is alive and that you can see it transform in the next collection, or you can understand how an idea has been reinterpreted by someone else, and this go on the thread of the same story, like since Gabi and since Gabi Aguillon, and it's very interesting, and it's very interesting and playful from an archive point of view.
It's such a playful way of keeping it alive. I was thinking about what you said, Géraldine, about the object kind of dying when it comes into a collection or a museum. And certainly, if you can all hear the sirens, there's, you know, on my end at least, there's always this fear and this kind of great anxiety that something so beautiful and lived in kind of loses that spark when it sits static. But you've done so much work to really keep it alive in so many different ways.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So also the luck I have also is that sometimes also when a part is missing of a garment, I can have it redone, or when a garment is too fragile, and that's also something very nice. That the luck of being in a house is that we have this possibility. And to come back to the idea of deaf object, in fact, in museum. I really invite you to discover more about Olivier Saillard. He talked a lot about this, of the idea of dépouille of the garments that are really, I don't know the English word for dépouille, like really the deaf skin, une mue aussi, il parle de mue. Mue d'un animal is what remains when you have a snake and that he loses skin. So from his point of view, the garments in museum are mues or dépouilles of what remain of so often of people when they are dead, and that you still have their l'empreinte, the shape of their body, and that's something that can make also sometimes a quite weird the experience of going in a museum storage place. When you work in a museum, that's sometimes it can be a little like mortifère. Sorry, I don't know the English word, but mortifying maybe? No, I don't know.
Yeah, it feels dead.
Well, it feels very dead, and that's also in fact, also in bizarrement. In a bizarre way, having lost the idea of the body, in fact, makes them, I think, more alive because it brings more your attention on the technique. I think when you see all the unpainted garments and on the fact that it's really done on the past body that was living in this garment. Thanks to the younger presentation.
There's a beautiful book and project by Emily Spivak called Worn Stories that I don't know if you all are familiar with, but it's one that gathers these kind of beautiful stories and histories and memoirs of people through the objects that they wore and love. And some are very humble. Some you can see the kind of tatters and wears from, you know, where someone's bag was always around their shoulder or things like that. And there's so much life and living that you see in these pieces that I think a kind of more straightforward display that takes away some of the spectacle and the storytelling that is done in magazines or photo shoots or the runway really allows to come forward. And I think it's quite a nice way of really underscoring so much of what we know Gabby wanted from Chloe, which is for it to be something you live your life in, quite accessible and approachable, while making you feel still so beautiful and luxurious.
Yeah, in fact, no, this idea of it could be very poetic and romantic and beautiful to express also the absence of the body, thanks to a garment. But as you say, also Gabby was really much more, I think, turned for something very more joyful and alive. And do you also produce magazine, and are you still working in this in between the status of object which also as me you are explaining people that there are no projects but pieces in your photo shoots, and that's
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still interested in the in-between. I think we've been really lucky or insane in the last decade of doing this project together. Jane and I have always managing to get to an archive just before it becomes, as Choghakate mentioned, kind of bigger or more important or more I guess serious. And I think that time that we had with you was really charming for us because it was small, as in the archive the space that you had to work in was difficult. I'm sure it's still not enough space, but there was there was something very real about it. Still kind of felt like there were lots of boxes. I remember the trawling, we were talking about finding things on eBay and you were saying, oh my God, if you still find this thing, send it to me, send me a link. Which I'm sure you're still engaged in. And I think with other projects we've done before, we've always managed to get access to something that hasn't necessarily been focused on before or taken very seriously. And I think what you were talking about earlier made me think also about the sorts of garments quite often that are preserved or shown in exhibitions about fashion are often the spectacular ones. It's the couture or it's the kind of really embroidered kind of pieces, or it's something that's really special. But I think when we talked about this again, the sort of blouse room in the Jewish Museum show, it was really kind of breathtaking, but breathtaking for its kind of quotidian attitude. The fact that these were all clothes that I probably passed 1 million women on my day wearing exactly those things. And I think there's something very powerful about that museum space and an archive space where you can isolate something and say, no, but this might look like, it may look very familiar, it may be an echo of something you have, but actually this is kind of more important actually than looking at a kind of Christian Dior New Look gown that one woman wore maybe 5 times. And I think I'm really interested again in us showcasing, not only with archivists, but just generally, a lot of us thinking about everyday clothing, like the holes in our jeans or the kind of holes in our elbows here from our jumpers. All of these things are the things that actually I think in years to come, I was really again when Géraldine, you were just saying that some of the people, the designers working in the studio, don't really even maybe know how to kind of handle these things in a certain type of way. And I see this here. I'm at school right now at St. Martin's, and watching my students take something off a hanger is really painful because they'll like stretch the neck and the hanger comes out of here. Because there is a generation of designer that is so disembodied from physical material, although they're working with it. Their perception of physical space is so different to ours, which is incredibly exciting. But it does mean that there's this kind of disconnect perhaps with how to look after something, how to preserve something. And I'm fascinated in how an archive and the roles of both all of you here are in some ways trying to uphold these differences of how to look after something and how to treat something. And because I know, from looking at kind of how the young people I work with think about physical clothing and material, to them it's as fresh as it was. If it's in their hands, it's kind of the same value as something that was made yesterday. And so there's something really fascinating in getting them to think about how things are delicate, even if it's a kind of fun banana print t-shirt from Phoebe Philo or Stella McCartney's period at Chloé. It is just as precious as something made of the finest lace in the 1950s. So there's something really fascinating, I think, about the power of anything that is in an archive to kind of get everybody thinking more about the value of material objects, which is again very much what I was thinking about when you were talking about magazines and paper, and because paper ages, right? The more something's looked at, the more it will disintegrate. I have old copies of French Vogue. The spine is kind of cracking, because the glue has gone hard. So, what do? Do you not open them for fear of the pages falling out, or do you? Which means again, it's like a garment unworn. It's a magazine or a book that's closed. So, all of these things I think are so fascinating if you choose to kind of break down the show and also your wider work in the archives. These are all of the questions I guess it throws up for me, and that's why I kind of love what I do and love getting to work with people like all of you.
Choghakate, are there last things that you want to throw into the mix?
Oh, that is all very exciting. I mean, I love this little addendum to our addendum discussion. I'm thinking about what you said, Kristina, earlier about the way we presented these garments in the show, so kind of detached it from the way it was imagined initially and the type of body it was intended for initially, because they're, I won't say neutral, because neutrality doesn't exist, but in a certain way they decontextualized, and in that way it allows you to reappropriate yourself the garment. Anyone can just, and also because most of these garments in the show are not styled, they're shown as separate pieces rather than outfits. I mean, there are some exceptions because they were necessary, but generally they're presented separately. Also, it kind of allows you a lot of freedom of interpretation and to do your own thing, your own projection, your own mix and match. So I thought that was an interesting point to think about.
And I will give a Gabby echo to what you just said, Choghakate, is also when I asked her to describe how she imagined a Chloé woman, and that she replied, there is not a Chloé woman. There is not a type of woman to embody a Chloé woman. It's, she said, there is no Chloé woman. It's just a woman that is, she said, in fact, a Parisian and a modern woman. That's all. But she's not blonde, or brunette, or nothing, tall or thin. And I think that's very important in the Maison, that nobody has never really embodied who is Chloé. That's remained a kind of fantasy which any woman can project, make as her own projection and embrace.
I think that's such a special and unique attribute to Chloé, especially for a label founded in the 1950s in Europe and an American context too. So many of those brands sit with the persona of their creator. The name is synonymous with the personality, and Chloé, as the exhibition has shown, as we all know, has lived so many lives and has changed and morphed with different attitudes and feminisms and expressions of how to be that modern woman, as you said, Géraldine. I think I think the delight really of being able to work with a brand and on a collection like this is that there are so many places where we can see ourselves and continue to see ourselves as they are kind of changed and morphed through context or decontextualized, if that's the case as well. It's been so lovely speaking with you all and getting to hear more about the archive from your perspective, Géraldine. You are such a champion and an amazing steward of such a beautiful body of work, and we're so grateful to be able to hear more of your stories working on it. Thank you, Doll, for bringing all of your intellect and beautiful lines of thinking and questioning through all of this, and Choghakate, of course, for the beautiful exhibition that brought us all together in the first place.
Thank you so much, Kristina.
Yay!